Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. If it's Monday, it must be Pablo Torre. Pablo, welcome.
Jen, I don't even know if we'll get to the fact that a UFC octagon was photoshopped onto the White House lawn. That's the kind of time we're living in. There's a lot going on as always.
Yeah, if I could start with that now that you mention it. Um, is it meant to be tacky, do you think? Is it still appealing to that kind of, bro hardcore sports audience? What is that about? Because most people look at that and say, geez, that looks kind of off.
Yeah, the history of MMA in America is a longer story. Certainly one that Dana White, who tends to be this is Dana White, the head of the UFC, the very rich and objectively successful, almost P.T. Barnum character who's taken MMA from the gutter to the White House lawn in an arc that is just rarely seen. He tends to be sitting next to President Trump at very public events. He was there, I believe, at Charlie Kirk's memorial. He is there at his right arm, it seems like, just at various stages of maximum visibility. He attends his events. So all of that is to say that there is some just pure rank business development happening here. There is some access into what has been called, I think, insufficiently, the manosphere, right? Keep in mind, Joe Rogan came from
Yeah.
MMA. That's his actual expertise. He's an MMA expert and a commentator for ESPN. Joe Rogan continues to be, or was, as the rights deal for MMA is now evolving and changing hands. But the point being, this is bread and circuses and money. It's bread and circuses and cash. And so I don't want to
Yeah.
overthink it. I think it's kind of obvious, but in terms of
Yeah,
what it resembles and what it says, it does say everything when you see
it
it from
really
the big
does.
picture. Yeah.
And it underscores how much I think Democrats miss this cultural connection, that it's whether you call it a vibe, whether you call it culture, that there is something beyond politics. And Democrats have to figure that out and come up with their own and make inroads in sports, in popular culture, the way Republicans have done, frankly.
Oh, look, there is a usage of sports. I'll even call it bluntly a prostitution of sports in the sense that there has been a transactional pseudo romance between the MAGA Republicans and sports as an institution. And this latest thing feels like that to me. I mean, we've talked about this endlessly, how Trump isn't so much a sports fan as he is somebody who knows that sports is valuable. And in that currency, here is yet another idea. And for Democrats, the answer to me the thesis of my kind of career at this point is understand why America considers sports so important. If you actually care about sports, Jen, as you and I both earnestly do, figure out how not to run from it because it feels like the toy department, but to acknowledge it for what it is, which is a vector of primacy in modern American life. And don't
Right.
be ashamed of that. Actually understand why it's important.
Absolutely. And by the way, I don't think it was any coincidence that the memorial yesterday was in a football stadium. And I wonder, though, I'd be interested to see, do you think the NFL outplayed the funeral? I thought it was bad timing for them, just because aren't most of their fans actually watching football on Sunday?
This occurred to me, right, as all of the cable news channels were picking up the memorial service at the Arizona Cardinals football stadium. Actual football was going on. I would say, as a general principle, I was very objectively impressed again by the amount of attendees and attention that service earned. Simultaneously, I don't think there's a more obvious truism in the world of television programming, then you should probably avoid going head to head against the NFL. So
Yeah.
for that reason, maybe something of strategic oversight.
It also kind of surprised me. I know we're kind of going down a deep dive here that doesn't have huge amounts to do with sports, but it does. How angry, how hateful it was, with the president of the United States saying, "I hate my enemies." That's more than kind of rah-rah sportsdom. That's a level of vitriol and anger. Talk to us a little bit about how that jives with kind of a sports mentality, which is loyalty to your team. And yes, there are these rivalries. Everyone likes to hate the Yankees, everyone likes to hate the Cowboys, but it's more about celebrating your own side. Trump and his movement are much more about hating the other side.
Yeah, it was a fascinating and totally predictable juxtaposition because there is the widow of Charlie Kirk doing her best. And again, I
Yes.
say this without any pejorative, doing her best to do a Christian thing, which is to forgive the person who has done the most to ruin her life. And in that way, she forgave the man who murdered Charlie Kirk on stage publicly. Um, President Trump coming around and doing the opposite, as if this is the thing that the people really want, as if this is the thing
Yeah.
that the fans of this building who occupy this stadium normally would demand, again, just reflects this sort of ugliness that is not exactly what sports culture needs to be.
Yeah.
There are many moments at which I will use the metaphors of a blood feud and vengeance and hatred and war to describe sports. Um, the thing about being president, and it just is continually just sort of astonishing that there is this lane of rhetoric still available to us. The thing about being president is that you should be something like the better angels that we aspire to. Um, I love sitting in the bleachers for a sporting event. I love sitting with the maniacs. I love sitting with the people for whom this feels like life and death. It just feels obvious that when you are trying to bring the temperature down around what feels like the explosive, just like flickering tinders, the embers of frankly what American life is like now, you would echo what Charlie Kirk's widow said, as opposed to just saying, actually, in his defense, what he just believes, which is that this is personal and not actually about God or religion or faith or anything resembling our angels. It's something that feels vindictive and cruel. And sports need not be that way. It should not be that way, knowing the difference actually between when it is truly beyond serious and when it is just a rivalry. That's also
Yes.
key to being a sports fan.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious now that the last thing that Trump wants to do is lower the temperature. And we saw that on full display. Shifting gears, I want to ask you about, I always call it Pablo's story because you broke it. You are continuing to make discoveries. What is going on with the Clippers?
Yeah, so the latest report, which we published on Thursday, is that, and again, this is in the context of a larger just beef I'm in with Mark Cuban, who will not stop tweeting and posting about this. And I welcome the antagonism. I welcome the adversarial response because I want to defend and explain my reporting whenever possible. But Mark Cuban said, hey, look into X, Y, and Z. We look into X, Y, and Z. It turns out there is not just smoke, but financial documents indicating that X, Y, and Z, the purchase of carbon credits, the further investment by Steve Ballmer, well beyond it is rational. It would have been rational to invest. All of that stuff was happening. And so the explanation is in the episode. I point you guys there. But the big headline here is that Steve Ballmer and the Clippers, they invested $118 million in 18 months into Aspiration, which is a company that they claim was acting when it came to Kawhi Leonard and this not allowed by the NBA secret no-show endorsement deal. They claim that they were acting independently. Here we have the paper trail indicating that at every time when money needed to be put into Aspiration, conveniently, Kawhi Leonard's contract could not be paid. Conveniently, Steve Ballmer and his enterprises came up with the money. And so, Jen, I'll just spell it out as clearly as I can. I believe that Steve Ballmer, the richest owner in all of sports, could and well, I think, was defrauded. I think that is true. The question is the one that I answer yes to is, per my reporting, whether he was defrauded by a person he had partnered with to deceive the NBA. And so it's a yes and story, not an either or story. I believe this was a deal to circumvent the salary cap gone wrong that resulted in his defrauding. And it also results in a story that cannot be explained except by a multi-part investigative series that is complicated, but points in a very simple direction, in my view.
Well, there is willful ignorance, and there is true ignorance. There is direct knowledge, and there's plausible deniability. So somewhere in there, I think lies the truth. But it is amazing reporting that you have done. Any sign that Ballmer is weakening, or that he's looking for like a way to apologize or explain this in some fashion?
At every turn, we offer the Clippers and Steve Ballmer the opportunity to see, before anyone else does, the detailed questions previewing our reporting the day before. There is nothing like that. There is merely the sticking to the script, in our view, that he is a victim and knew nothing else about this larger scheme that we have reported. I will point out, though, that the pressure is mounting. Adam Silver has now himself been caught with an inconsistency in terms of his initial claim, which was, frankly, I've never heard anything about aspiration, never heard of an engagement with the Clippers. I then produced documentation of the Clippers' $300 million sponsorship deal with aspiration that had to be, quote, expressly approved by the NBA itself. Adam Silver was asked about this at a conference on camera. He then said he misspoke. In fact, he had heard of aspiration, which is curious because the language had been so clear. And so now you wonder, what is this suggesting about the desire for the league to take on this seriously? And the pressure, the last point I'll raise here, that the pressure is mounting not simply because of all of these things that I am reporting. It's also because I have noticed, this is a through line in our conversations, people turn to sports because in sports you can actually see accountability in ways that the real
Yes,
world can no longer provide. And so
right.
Steve Ballmer, one of the 10 richest people on the planet, what they are realizing is that this man, who, when he was, of course, CEO of Microsoft, overseeing that company through one of the signature case studies in monopolistic behavior in which the US government won its case against Microsoft, they are seeing that maybe this man could actually be held accountable in sports by the NBA in a way that we do not see, frankly, in the real world anymore. There's also pressure in that regard, people feeling like, man, sports might be, if we do it right, the last place where the richest among us might feel anything like shame for what they have
Yeah,
allegedly done. And I think that's also a movement that we're feeling as well.
absolutely. So there was a true feel-good moment, although a bittersweet moment, when um, Kershaw, who is really one of the best Dodger pitchers, although he's, we think a long season, and then I think back, oh, wait a second, Nolan Ryan, these people who pitched into
Yeah.
their 40s, but he's had injuries, he's well into his 30s, he has announced he is retiring, and he played his last game at Dodger Stadium for the regular season, and he had his family out there, and they dug up the pitching rubber, which I didn't realize was such a big thing. They went so deep. I thought it was like a little thing on the top of the mound, but
Same.
apparently not. They dug it up. The kids were out there. What were you thinking when this was going on?
It's a really special thing when any player, any athlete gets to play as long as Clayton Kershaw has for the same franchise. It's rare to come in as an infant, as a rookie, to last as long, and by the way, to survive the roller coaster. There was a poetry in this being a thing that Dodger fans like yourself, Jen, recognized in the context of the regular season. In the
Yeah.
regular season, Clayton Kershaw is unimpeachable. He is one of the great left-handers of all time. The postseason has always been, in our continuing examination of what it's like when the pressure gets turned up, it's where he's had so much more trouble. But as a sports fan, as a sports reporter, what I must acknowledge is that anyone whose longevity and sustained success, even in the regular season, is on the level of Kershaw. I mean, of course he's, to me, a Hall of Famer. Of course, he is to me worthy of this applause. And I think that for Dodger fans, I don't want to underrate that this is something that we just see less and less of in sports. Player movement is now more of a default than it is the exception. And Kershaw is, in that way, also one of the last of his kind.
Exactly. And you're right about him. How many people have spent like an entire career with one club at this stage? Very few. It also struck me that sports has become such a solo act and such a single male act in many respects that this reminded us of kind of the family experience of sports, going with your kids, young kids, parents teaching kids about sports, that it wasn't all about him, it was him and his family. And I thought that that was special and a little sad because we see perhaps less of this. It's more about, unfortunately, scandals that a single player has had, or behavior that may or may not be terrific. But here was a family guy, and I thought that was kind of nice. It was a change.
Oh yeah, look, there have been some iconic moments involving athletes and their kids. I remember Drew Brees lifting up his son when the Saints won the Super Bowl. I, of course, I think about just the relationship Tiger Woods had with his mom and dad. This one I thought was special, not just because of the time and the general cynicism that pervades everything, sports, of course, included. It also was meaningful because it's just a sign of how much time you've spent watching this guy as a fan.
Yeah.
Like he came in as a teenager, he leaves as a dad with children that you basically watched grow up in front of you.
Yeah.
Um, there is just a passage of time that I think was palpable for that reason too.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's end with some golf. The Ryder Cup is begins this week. And that is, of course, a competition rather, between Europe and the US. It has gotten bigger, I think, over time, more excitement, more attention. Is that because we're just dying for more of every sport? Is it because the national competition, like the Olympics, has kind of a special allure? What do you think it is that it's gotten such a play that it didn't maybe have 5 or even 10 years ago, certainly?
So I certainly think the rise of trash talk as a common expected behavior is responsible for some of this, right? Like golf, of course, has been the most gentlemanly of all of the
Yes.
sports. This is, for that reason, a bit different. I also think you overlay some of those bigger macro trends along the lines of live golf and Saudi
Yeah.
Arabia. I say that not abstractly. I say that because I was just looking up some of the headlines coming out of the Ryder Cup already, and Bryson DeChambeau yesterday is basically talking trash to Rory McIlroy. Rory's talking trash back. Some of the subtext, of course, is that Rory was not a live golf
Yes.
guy. Bryson was. And so the international and globalization of all of this, of golf in particular, it has created these fault lines that any international competition, especially, sort of gets to reveal anew. And so there is the bad blood, there is the bad money, there is the general tension among the stars who are now all, as we are, as our government is, if anything else, creatures of the internet. And so
Yeah.
there's just that happening as well.
Well, we will end on this. We are seeing, I think, a new phase of the Trump autocracy and the suspension of Jimmy Kimmel and the
Yeah.
decision that Trump announced that he's telling his attorney general to go after his enemies now. And I think in that time, sports becomes even more vital. It's some sense of community, some sense of joy, it's some sense of relief. Is it pure escapism that we long for, or do we just hope against hope that some of the sports ideals, the sports values, character, dare we say, will rub off on the rest of us.
I think it can be both. And I think it's escapism in the realm of, man, sometimes I just want to go and watch this thing that I love, that is
Yeah,
entertaining for entertainment's sake. And sports must never forget that that is an enormous adhesive, an enormous
yeah,
part of the glue that binds our country together. We need places, frankly, where we can sit next
yes.
to each other in a football stadium and we don't vote the same way, and yet we are cheering for the same thing. Just a viscerally rare experience these days. But the second thing, which I feel is so real more and more each day, is that fair play in sports, the idea of meritocracy, the idea of integrity, the idea of these virtues that I used to dismiss as like these old cliches around like what it means to have sportsmanship and dignity and respect while also being hyper competitive. These things, sports does not only model, sports might be our last major refuge to see those things as
Absolutely.
authority figures and our literal laws of the land are subject to, $50,000 in a bag of cash, I'm like, at some point, if that doesn't matter, as the story of Tom Homan's over the weekend most recently points to, where can we feel like anyone's being held accountable? And if it happens to be the games, the toy department, then I just hope the toy department realizes why that is so and that there is responsibility then with actually being real and true to those values.
Great point. Well, I certainly wish we could award red cards in politics and technicals and ejections.
Couple
Maybe we should
flagrants.
import
Yeah.
some of that. Flagrant fouls, exactly. But we will have to wait for a different era for that. Pablo, great as always. The intersection of sports, politics, race, the economy, it's all there. So have a great week, and we will look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah, Jen, talk to you then.
Bye bye.